Hi, everyone. Christopher Menker from Planet, Senior Software Specialist. So today we're here to discuss the bidding multiplier in CAD-Vision. So the idea will be to go over how to properly set up your cost in CAD-Vision and then put together a bidding system using rate tables, labor tables, and also use non-graphic accessories and also add-ons. So the idea is to use a cost plus method. So in CAD-Vision, what we'll do is we'll use the material cost and add a percentage of markup to it. The cost plus method is basically something that's widely used in the woodworking industry and even in the construction industry. So the idea is you will put all your costs in the software, your labor, your overhead cost as well, and then apply markup taxes to get your total cost for your projects. So what we'll do is first we'll focus on what you need to set up to get started, like cost-wise, and then how to create the bidding system with the rate table. So as I said, we will use the cost plus method. So that will basically force us to first focus on the cost in CAD-Vision and then move to the bid center to set up the bidding system. So when we want to create this method, we'll first start working in the material manager. And in the material manager, what we want to do is to input the cost of all your different material that will be used in your project. So you don't necessarily need to fill out 100% of the material cost in the entire database. It's really something that could be done as you go. But what we want is just to learn how to do it. What I will do, I will show you my setup in CAD-Vision. I will give you some tips and also show you some example on how to create a new material cost in the material manager. So I'll switch to CAD-Vision right now. And we'll go straight in the material manager. So what we'll do is we will click from the main menu on the material button. So this is right on the very top of your toolbar. So we'll click material. That will open the material manager. So in the material manager, if you're familiar with it, you'll have all your group of materials on the left. And when you click on the group, you get the list of the material inside this group. So when we set up cost in CAD-Vision, what we'll focus on is the cost, the default cost. We'll focus also on the markup if we want to use markup in the material manager, and also the waste as well. There's other things that I will explain, but those will be really like the three important factors to get the cost properly input. So what we do in CAD-Vision when we set up cost, we first select the material we want to use. And typically I do it directly in the material properties itself. We could do it directly in the actual like column and table, just simply type it. But right now I like to just select the material by clicking on the ID and then do a double click and then open the material properties windows. And the reason why it's because I have also more properties that could be tied to material cost as well. So when we have this window open, we will focus on the default cost. So the default cost could be a flat and fixed cost for this material, no matter where you purchase it, or you can manage vendors where the actual cost will vary depending on the vendor that will be used for each project. So if we want to use vendors, what we want to do first is to just return for a second and manage those vendors from the vendor button in the toolbar. So at the very top of your toolbar, you have a vendor button. You can click on it, and here you can modify or add more vendors to your list. And by adding vendors later on, you can select a material, add vendors, and change the cost based on the vendor. So this is really when you want to do bids where you're not sure where you get the material from, but you want to also get a true cost of the job itself based on where you purchase your material. If you just want to simplify things, you could skip the vendors and just put the cost directly, and you will always be the same. But we'll do the example with some vendors and some without vendors as well. So here I have a list of vendors already. Of course, if you want to add a new vendor, you click on the new button. Or if you want to delete a vendor, you select it from the list and you click on the delete button. The vendor, commonly, the minimum you need is at least a name. And if you want, you can also add more information, address, contact number as well. But we will just make sure that we have a name for the vendor we have currently here. So now click return. So if I go back to my material, and let's say this 3/4 maple melamine, I wanted to input different costs based on where I'm planning to purchase it. So I'll double click on the ID of this material. In the toolbar, I have a vendor button. If you don't see it, or if the toolbar looks different, it's maybe because your window is too small, so you can actually resize the window so you get all the options in the toolbar, and you want to click on the vendor button. So now in the vendor manager, what you can do is to first select the different vendor that would be available for this product. So I will, for example, include 2 vendors, Richelieu and Commonwealth. And then you can set a cost per vendor. So for Richelieu, for example, I can say that this cost me $42.5, but for Commonwealth is $43. And of course, you can also set a separate markup for both of those vendors. So right now, what I will do, I will just simplify the system where I will not put markup per material, which is possible if you wanted to, but me, I will mark up my entire project at the very end of my bidding. So basically, I will get all the material cost, all the overhead, labor, and then apply a global markup to it. If we wanted, we could create separate markup per material and per vendor. But be careful if you put a markup here and then also apply markup at the end in your bid center, both will stack. So Cabvision will mark up basically twice using both value for the code that will be generated. Also, other thing you want to pay attention to is in the vendor manager, it's to select also your default vendor. So the default will be the one that will be used when you start a new project and use this material. So if you know there's more chance to use, for example, Richelieu, make it your default. But keep in mind, later in the bid center, we can manually change vendor for every single material if needed. So this could be just a starting point, but it could be changed down the road as well. So I'll close this. Now that I selected vendors, you'll see that my default cost will be grayed out just because now the cost is linked to the vendor. So if I switch to Commonwealth as a default, I have the Commonwealth cost. If I switch to Richelieu, I get the Richelieu cost as well here. So that's what will be done when you select vendors. If you would not wish to use vendors, it will be a little bit easier. So you would just select a material. So I'll pick another one and just simply type directly in the default cost field, the cost of your material, 28.5, and then return. And now that will be now your material cost here. So that's how you set up your material cost. And that will be really like the step 1 of setting up a bidding system using xBidding with Cabvision. A second thing to pay attention while you're setting up your cost is, of course, to double check your unit of issue. So just to make sure that based on the material type, you use the proper units. So if it's, for example, edge banding, it may be per linear feet of banding. If it's a drawer guide, maybe it's a pair. So just make sure that based on the material you use, the unit is properly set and the cost is tied to the unit. So you basically break down your price based on the unit itself. An example is my banding will be per foot. So this will be a cost per foot in the list right here. So we set the units, we set the default cost. As I said, we could set a default markup if we wanted to. Me, I will just leave my markup to 0. Another thing to keep an eye on is the waste percentage. So waste is always a good thing to set just because it's virtually impossible to always use 100% of what you buy. So if you buy a edge banding, maybe you have to edge band again, damage part. Maybe it's a panel. You always like trim cut the panel. There's a lot of waste, damage and broken parts. So that's why you want to also add waste. And when we get in the bid center, Cablevision basically will do an estimate of the total quantity of material plus waste. So if it's estimate that you need, for example, 3 panels of white melamine, you will add an extra 15% of melamine to the code. So it will be free plus 15% that will be charged to the client. Tip is, if it's a panel, I typically start at least at 15% waste. It could go easily to 15, 20%, depending on the type of material you cut. Most of the time, if it's something that you cut on a daily basis, often to build like most of your cases, you will have much more waste. For example, white melamine, maple melamine would create a lot of waste. So you could bump those waste percentage to a little bit more than 15%. On the other hand, if you purchase a very expensive material, it's a special order, maybe you could reduce the waste because you would know that in the shop, everyone is much, much more careful and mindful before cutting it and wasting material on it. So just adjust the waste based on the type of materials. For bending, I typically need just over 5% of waste. The reason why is because on the bending properties itself, so if I take, for example, the PVC white bending, double click on the ID, I have a field under the bending group to set the length trim value. So Cablevision is already adding this value to the length of the bending itself. So in this case, I will have my bending always be purchased 2 inches longer than the part I'm going to edge bend. So the 5% is more like an extra blanket. If during like the manufacturing process of the job, there's some damaged part that we have to edge bend again. So I know I have a little bit of room for that. But keep in mind that most of the length will be coming from the trim value right here. If we talk about drawer guide and hinges, typically I don't have much waste set, trying to make sure that nobody's wasting like those hardware. They are more expensive, and also they are like things that you easily like count and identify. So you would not have much waste, but you could put a very low percentage of waste if needed as well. So that will be here what I will start setting up in the material manager. So as I said, before you start creating rate tables and trying to quote anything, make sure that you create a system where you have your material cost. Even if the bidding is not properly working yet, but at least you get a good view of the job cost in real time. So that's always a good thing to do, even early in the implementation of Cablevision. So we can return and go back to my PowerPoint. So once we set the material cost, we would typically also, while we're here, set up the door cost. So the door cost is mostly for those doors that will be buyout, so the buyout doors, which mean that I'm not planning to cut them, I'm planning to purchase them from a third-party supplier. If you're cutting your own doors, that will fall back to setting up the cost in the material manager here, where you identify the panel that will be used for the door, set the cost, and then that will be part of the total cost of your materials. Now, when it's buyout, what you will want to do is to this time switch to the door manager. So I return back to my main menu. I will click on the door button in my toolbar to open my door manager. So when you set up the door cost, the idea is to select the door style and set the cost per material. That's really the way I'm doing it. The idea is if I'm ordering a shaker door, I want to be able to tell Cablevision for a shaker door, I want to set the cost per square foot to be $10 for example, maple, $15 for cherry, and $16 for walnut, for example. So that's how I will set up the cost for my door. So to do that, you will select first your door style. So I will navigate to my door catalog. For example, I'll use my flat panel door. You will double click to select the door style. So here I'm not filling out anything in the door style itself where I set a unit and a cost per square foot. I leave this to 0. but instead I will go to my material filter. And what that will do, that will allow me to see the different material available for this specific door style and setting up the cost per square foot for each of those material being used for this door style. So for example, here I have a flat panel door, which could be done in birch, in cherry, in maple, oak, and other colors. And then I can set my cost for each of them. And CAMvision will really go by the door style and the material to find the actual cost of the door. So that's really much more accurate than setting up the same cost no matter what is the material being used for the door. So when you're here, you have your material selected in the list already. So you will find that each door style already have a set assigned amount of materials. And then probably yours will be at 0 to start with because that was never set before. So you have 3 things to set if needed. So the first one is the cost per door. So the cost per door is a flat cost that will be applied for each door. So if you set it to $5, each of those doors will be priced at $5 depending on the quantity of door you have. Then if you set a cost per square foot, on top of the cost per door, CAMvision will also add the cost per square foot. And the last thing is to set a minimum cost that will basically tell CAMvision to check either the combination of both or the total cost per square foot and make sure that this value is equal or over the minimum cost. And it's more if you purchase your doors and you happen to have a supplier that tell you that they will always charge a minimum of X amount of square foot. For example, some will say that even if you buy a very tiny, small drawer front, they will still charge you 1.5 or 2 square foot for this front. So you will basically do the math and set this as a minimum cost. So now in practice, so we have our flat panel doors. Let's say I wanted to set the cost for the maple door. So for those doors I'm purchasing, I don't need to set a cost per door. I only want to basically price them per square foot. So I will say that, for example, I'm charging $9.5 per square foot for maple shaker door. And I set my minimum cost to $14.25. And what is this value? This value is 1.5 square foot of any door. So basically that'll be 9.5 times 1.5 represent 14.25. So CAMvision will know that no matter the size of the door, the minimum cost has to be $14.25. And if it's over this value, CAMvision will just normally price it with the cost per square foot. So this will just guarantee that you get always a minimum cost for your doors. So you'll repeat this exercise for each of your door styles. So you just go through each door style in the door catalog, and then you can set the cost in the material filter and input all the cost in the field selected. Also a tip that I use sometimes, and it's more if you want to quickly fill out something with a dummy value. Let's say here there's nothing, but I want to just have some number to start with, so I'll put $10. When you do that and you have a value, at the bottom right of the actual field, if you move your mouse a little bit, you'll see that the cursor will change for like a cross. And what that will do, that will do exactly the same thing you can do in Microsoft Excel, where you can drag down and just copy the same value in all the rows below. So you click OK, yes, and now you have all the same value. So if you have like 100 of colors and you just want to fill out quickly something, just set it up and drag down, and that will update all the columns below it here. So when we close, we'll always be asked to save. And now the change is applying. So this square raised panel door now has a cost per square foot of $10 now attached to it. And as I said earlier, if I have a slab door, let's say it's a slab door that I'm actually making in-house with my machine, you'll see that my cost is 0 here, just simply because I'm just cutting them on my CNC machine. What you could do sometime, and it's just an idea, is if it's rotted doors, even if you still charge for the cost of the MDF, is maybe to put if I just go back to the material filter, just to put a little bit of like upcharge, just because it's more complicated, it takes more time. So you can even set a cost per door, a cost per square foot, just for the manufacturing process if you wish to. It's not you must do, but it's just a good place to put this for your bid later on. So this is our door cost. Now the next thing is where we will switch to the bid center to go and start doing the configuration inside the bid center to be able now to use all this data and build some quotes. So what I'll do, I'll switch to my CabVision job. So I'll just use a default job, open it, and go in the bid center. So the idea is you take a job and you use that job to build basically your bidding system. Because the job already has material, parts, hardware. Then what we'll do is to create the different rate table so we can do our testing and check if the total cost is what we want. So I have my job made of cabinets, parts, and hardware. So the bid center will be available in the reports tab. So we click reports. And when we click on the report tab, we'll click on the bid center button. And that's where we'll do the configuration of the bid center. So CabVision will now open the bid center. So in the bid center, when you open it, if you already set up some rate tables and already checked what you want to use to quote this job, that will already be saved and active on your screen. But if you never set up anything in your bid center, it's likely that this will all be zero maybe. So how it works is CabVision take your project and then apply rate table to it. So rate tables are what will be run to calculate the total cost of your project. So rate table is almost like an Excel spreadsheet or several Excel spreadsheets that will be basically applied to your job. And one spreadsheet, if I just open one, will be basically a set list of methods to calculate different things in your project. So you can basically select a method line by line and select a value and name it. And then CabVision will run this, give you a total, and then go to the next line, run this line, give you a total, and then basically just run the full number and give you the total price at the end. When you select rate tables also, because you can check them down the list on the left, you can apply multiple rate table for the same job, which means that you can break down basically a project in different rate tables where you want, for example, to charge for finishing in a separate rate table than charging for countertop or charging for installation or for labor, for example. This is also how you could basically do different type of bidding, one with granite, one with laminate, and just select the one that should be used for each project here. So if I switch to laminate, now I had 29, but now go down to 20,000 because now I'm using a laminate rate table. So this is like the big line on how to do that. But we'll just now step back a little bit and go step by step on how to set this up from scratch. So very first thing you want to do first is to check your options. So your option is more about already setting up some default, like for example, default deposits. If you want to always mark up your job by default, you can do it as well. But keep in mind in the rate table, you can apply markup in the rate table and also add an extra markup in the preferences in this particular field here. Mine, I just leave it at 0 and I'll just mark up my rate table as I need it to. The next thing is it's to check your rounding. So depending on how you want to present the total cost. So if you want to the nearest dollar or instead put decimal, so you can do it, of course. And the third thing I always check is the show or hide properties, especially the very first one, the one called show price line that are 0. So this one, I always turn it on when I'm the one setting up the pricing system for the users, just because when you set this up and you start, you're never sure that everything has a cost yet. So it just helps you to make sure that you're not missing any material cost as you're checking your different job and do different testing. So mine is set to show those lines. And what that will do is when you will switch to what we call the internal mode, Caption will give you a breakdown of each rate table, show you exactly how it was calculated, and you can see if some value was set at 0, you can see which one has no cost, for example. So for the internal mode, you can also set a password. So mine doesn't have a password for now, but if you want, you can set your own password and change it as well here. And I know some early version used to have a default password, and the default password was solid, SOLID, if you wondering what is the password. So the only thing I'm changing here is just to turn on to show the line that are 0. So this is on. And now, as an example, I'll just turn off all my rate table and just create a new one from scratch. So right now I have no rate table applied. The only cost I have here is just an accessory that's already part of my design. And it's just a flat rate for it. But this is not coming from my bid center, it's just coming from my drawing where I set the cost for Magic Corner. So now when we create a rate table, we go to the rate table in the toolbar. We'll click on the setup button. And if you have existing rate tables, it will all be listed and can be modified after being selected. They could be also created from scratch by clicking on the new rate table button, or they could be copied or renamed or deleted. So those are the options we have in the toolbar. So what I'll do, I'll create a new one and I'll name it underscore test 1 and click OK, just to start from scratch. So this rate table right now is blank and it's not doing anything. So if I click close and I just turn it on and click OK, you'll see that nothing happened because I didn't instruct Caption to do anything yet with this rate table. So let's go back to it and let's click on the setup button after selecting the test one and start adding a line. So first thing, I want to name my line. So I'll name it, for example, material cost. I just want first to start calculating the material cost. So to tell Caption that I want to calculate the material cost, when I click outside the name, Caption will try to select the first default method. And a method is what you will use to instruct Caption on doing something for you. So usually at the very first top of the method list, you have something called percentage of material cost. And what it does is it will tell Caption to include the percentage of the material cost into your quote. So right now, if it's 0, nothing will happen because it's 0% of the cost. But of course, if you put 100%, you will tell Caption that this will calculate the entire material cost for the project. So I will just close this, click OK. And now I can see that my tester one will return about $3,400. And if I activate my internal mode, I can also see more options. So if it's off and you click on the little plus next to test one, you'll see that there's only a line called material cost, and that's just the total of the method percentage of material cost. But if you click on internal mode and click again on the plus, now Caption will let you see more detail on how he came up with this $3,451. So basically, that's where I said that when you turn the option to show the material at 0, you can see if everything has a cost and how the cost is used in the bid you're creating here. So right now, my material cost is based off some hinges, edge band, panels, hinge plate, and drawer guides, for example. And that's really what I have in my project currently. So basically, Caption will estimate based on what it will find and show you with the internal mode a step-by-step on how it came up with this total value. So right now, I have 74 hinges, and they are $4 each, which is coming from my material manager that we set earlier. And now I know that I have $296 of hinges in this project. So this is how array table works. And that's where then you go basically line by line and start building a full pricing system. So this is where you will basically set, okay, how do I want to price? Maybe I want material cost, I want installation, I want delivery, I want labor, I want finishing, and then you just basically tell Cabvision and teach Cabvision how to get all those things implemented. Another thing you can do in array table, and that's also to make it easier to read, is to create headers. So the little plus button in the toolbar lets you basically add a header for a group. So here I can call this group, for example, material cost. And I can put several things under it in the material cost, and just to group things. Or I can just rename it cost only if this is material cost and maybe door cost as well. So maybe I will say door cost. And what I will do is this time, I will tell Cabvision, instead of using the percentage of material cost, I will tell him to use this one called use door catalog pricing. And your use door catalog pricing is going to use the price and cost you set in the door manager. And as you can see, there's no value because it will just use the price and let you mark up and add taxes to it here. So right now my markup is 0. So I just set it to 0 just to get just a cost. So if I close this, click OK. Now this is updated where my test rate table will calculate my material cost and my door cost. And my door cost will give me a breakdown of the door size. So I have 52 doors, about 179 square foot of maple doors, and this is 9.5. And as you can see, the number comes to where you put the numbers. And remember, I put the number on the door style, on the material. So you will only trigger the actual calculation when you identify this is a maple flat panel door, so it should be $9.5 per square foot right here. And this is also with the internal mode a good way to understand where you input the price of each thing in your project. So do you put it on each door itself, on each door style, on the material associated to the door instead here. So this is the step to add your own method to array table. And of course, as you can imagine, we will need much more than this. So we'll just add more and more and more. And sometimes we'll create separate rate table to calculate things that not necessarily always going to be applied in every single job. So you could create one if you're planning to install it or not install it. You can create a separate rate table called installation and check it or uncheck it within the job to turn it on or turn it off here. So before I continue, I will go back to Amanda and the chat and see if we have any questions in the chat. So if you want to ask a question, just switch or click on the chat button and we will answer all those questions.
Yes, so Brad has a question. Brad, do you want to type your question into the chat? I will give Brad a moment to do that. And maybe, Christopher, what I could do is bring up one of the questions that we received this morning in the French webinar that we held earlier today. So someone had asked for clarification about the materials. There were a few different percentages to add, and they just wanted clarification that the taxes were applied after the markup and the other fields.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. So as you remember in the material manager, we could add tax on a specific material. So what I will trigger is when we are in the bid center, remember when we go in the internal mode and we have material. So when we select this material, the tax could be already calculated per material. Whereas if you add the tax directly on the tax field at the end of the actual method, this will be calculated at the end for every material all at once. So you have just to be careful. If you add a tax on the material itself, to make sure that you don't add a second or third tax later down, unless you have a reason why, if there's several tax, TPS, TVQ, for example, depending on the province where you're from. So just use the tax. If it's only one tax, you can apply it at the tax field on the rate table, or it could be directly in the material manager.
Perfect. Thank you. So we have another question. Oh, so sorry. Brad raised his hand by accident. There was no question. It looks like everything is clear, Christopher, for now.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Brad.
Okay. So so we started setting up the rate tables. So now if we would continue, so we would basically keep adding more information to our rate table. So as I said, typically you will get the material cost, you'll get labor, you'll get door pricing, you get finishing, and then installation, delivery, depending on what service you're providing. So we already covered on how to set up the material cost. So we could be basically using the material cost coming from the material manager or the door manager. Now let's focus, for example, on labor. So how to set up labor and add labor to our quotes. So for labor, if I switch back to CAD-Vision, the first thing is to instruct CAD-Vision how we will calculate labor for our different projects. So we're still in the bid center. So what we'll do now is just to change the view. So next to the internal mode button, you have a view mode button. So if we click on this button, we have several options, and the last one is labor. So we will click on the labor view, and that will allow us to view the existing labor table, but also create new ones by clicking on the setup button next to the labor field. So if I click on the setup button, that's where I can create my very own labor system. And you can, of course, same as the rate table, create different ones. So let's create a new one, and I'll call it test labor. Click OK. And for this one, for example, I want to first start by setting up a design fee. I will just simplify it. I will say that, and this is just an estimate. Of course, it's not like meant to be exact to the minute. So, for example, CAD-Vision will not run a timer on how long you spend drawing the job. It's more in a quote where you want to plan saying drawing a standard cabinet takes, for example, for my designer, maybe a couple of minutes. Drawing a shaped cabinet takes longer. Drawing a tall pantry takes maybe more or less time. So what you can do is even break it down per type of assembly. So you can say per base assembly, for example, it takes 2 minutes, whereas maybe base. Now just copy this and put corners, just because corners maybe have a little bit more work. So put 3 minutes, and I can say per. And when it's corners, I can do 45. And we have to do it also for 90-degree corners here. So 3 minutes, 3 minutes. And I can set after that uppers. So you don't have to be that specific. You could just say per assembly, and you have one just called per assembly, and it will include every cabinet. Just count how many cabinets and just put a set amount of minutes per cabinet. So I'll put uppers like 1.5. And of course, you also have to make sure that you set hourly rate. So if you leave it at 0, that will give you time, but that will not calculate anything. So you want to say that you have an hourly rate. The hourly rate could be basically based on your own needs. So you could go by the wage, or you could go by wage per plus overhead fees. So for example, you want to include like more than just the wage. Let's say you want to include like loan, rent, utilities, and more to it. So you could basically run a calculation on all those things and find basically a cost to kind of keep the lights on. And if you never did it or don't have an idea, you could just build a very simple spreadsheet where you set your shop expenses on 30 days cycle and just set the cost. So for example, I have 12,000 rent, loan 2,500, payrolls, utilities, and others. So my subtotal is 26,400. And I will say that I will basically plan to work 22 days a month. So this will be divided by 22, which will return 1,200. And then to get the hourly rate, this $1,200 will basically divide it by 8, which here in this example gave me 150 per hour. So this will be my entire shop hourly rate, and then I can set this here. So this is an idea. This is not like you must use it, but that's more like if you want to simplify it, you just put this in the dollar per hour field. Then I can do, for example, milling. And milling, what I can do for milling is you could, if you want, create a system where in the part manager, you can set minutes per part. So you can say like building this specific part type take 2-3 minutes, and then use that for Caption to calculate it. So if you wanted to do it in that method, you will use the one called per hour of part labor. And because it's per hour, you have to set the unit to 60. And I'll still use $150. And for this to work, you have to make sure that in your part manager, you set some value for labor. So if I close this job, and I'll just save it to show you where to set those value. So I'll save my job, return, and close. I'll go back to my part manager in my system toolbar. And if I go in the assembly group, that will list all the parts I can build or manufacture in my shop. And then what you can do in the labor each field, you can set minutes per part type. So the minutes here will vary on depending on the complexity of the part. So if I know things goes to the CNC and take more time, I will bump it a little bit more. If things just get cut by hand, I might put a lower value, or I can increase it if it's something very specific and very complicated to build. So that's where basically the minute will come from. So typically I use it mainly for assembly and for drawbox and rollouts as well. And then I just go through the whole list and just say, this is what I want to set for my labor for each part type. The great thing about this system too is if you wanted to also use this in the future to just give a quick estimate of just manufacturing a project without designing, without installing and all that, you could just create a separate system where you only calculate the total labor per part, apply the hourly rate, and just then put markup. And then you can say, if I need to cut this kitchen for you, this is how much it will cost you. Given that you provide to me, like you buy your own material, deliver it to my shop, for example. So that's in the part manager. And when you select a category of part, you will basically look at the labor each column. So this will be a total number of minutes per part. And the labor setup is a set amount of minutes for this family of parts. So basically it means when you have a deck or 15 deck, you will always charge a flat amount of time just to get started working on decks, for example. Same for bottoms. So that's more like a setup time where, let's say, you have to prepare your CNC machine or something like that, so you can set a setup time here. So I will return and go back to my project. And in my project, I will go back to my bid center. Perfect. So in the bid center, I was setting up my labor. So just change the view to labor and click edit. And I was editing the one called test labor. So my milling, as I said, was per hour of part labor, where I said 60 minutes is my unit and I wanted $50. So right now, if I were just to leave it as it is, it's called test labor and close this. If I wanted just to test it quickly, I can go select it in the drop-down list. And Capgemini will tell me that for this job, right now you have 11, let's say 12 hours of labor. So design is about 40 minutes and milling is about 11 hours of milling. And of course, it will depend on how you set things. And same as the rate table, you could also create groups. So probably I will add a group at the very top. I'll call it design fees right here. And add another one called production. And in production, maybe I'll add edge bending. And in this case, for edge bending, you will find the one called per linear foot of edge bending. So Capgemini basically will take the total linear foot of edge bending found in the job, and then you can set how long does it take per linear foot to edge bend. So depending on your edge bender, the system you have, so I would say, for example, 30 seconds, or let's say a minute, just to keep the number easy to reference. Same, so 1 minute per linear foot, just to show that now my production time, I have 9 hours. So it's probably way too high because you have to, after that, to do some testing, say, does it really take 9 hours to edge bend an entire job? Probably not. So you could, after that, play with the value and maybe 0.25. And now 2 hours. This is a good starting point to edge bend like the entire kitchen and get it ready for the next stage. So then you can click and keep adding more and more to your labor. And what you want is just to see if the time, the estimate of time makes sense. It doesn't have to be accurate to the minute. It's just a range. Like, is it like kind of like making sense to charge people for this amount of time for your project? So that's what you want to identify. And of course, after that, you would want to explore all the other existing method. If you want to charge time to install hinges, draw guides, things that take really like times to build a kitchen or a bathroom. So you can just add all those things in the list here. And if you want an idea, if I just switch back to my PowerPoint, on this side, for example, it's a system where you just create, as I said first, your design group. So in this design, I will charge basically a couple of minutes per standard cabinet. Per shape part is more if you have custom shape parts, so you can also charge extra time for the designer to shape those parts. And then custom design is your corners. Now, in the machining cycle, you can do routing, drilling. This one is more to separate those. Drilling is more if you have a drilling like dowel machine, for example. You could also put a little bit of time for that. You can do if you have dados, if you have custom routing. So those are more like separate by operation type, where mine was more set by part type. I set the time for it. And then you could do sanding and spraying. It's per square meter of finished area. So that's basically to put the time for the guy to do the sanding and finishing. Then assembly is what you need to install in the shop. So hinges, put cabinets together means that you will handle parts. So here it's just an estimate. So 2 minutes is maybe a little bit too much for like assembling each part, but you could use it per part. And then drawer guides, handles, drawer fronts, and drawer boxes as well. And at the end is more like finishing and installation. So this is more like if you need to also install fillers, crown molding, and other things as well in your labor here. So that's just to show you like kind of the area you could include in your labor system. So design, machining, assembly, and maybe installation as well. So once you put all this together, how you add it to your actual rate table. So that's what we'll see next. So I created my labor system. So I will now have to switch back in the view properties to the bid breakdown view. And the bid breakdown view bringing back to basically where you had your rate table at the very beginning. So we click on rate table again, find the rate table we were building. So that was the one called test one. Click setup. And now if you wanted to add, for example, labor, and the labor will be, when you select the method, you will basically look for the one starting with the word labor and the name of the labor system you built. So mine was called test labor. And here is basically adding the cost of the labor, which you can mark up and add taxes to it if you wanted to. And maybe I'll also create a group. This one. And call it labor. And now if I close, check those, and just check my test. Now in test one, I have cost of material, cost of door, and cost of labor as well. And if I switch to internal mode, I get more detail on each line, which I can see how I calculate, for example, my design fees, I calculated my production fees, milling per part, edge bending time, and so on. So now, once you have the labor added, so this is now active on this rate table. So I have cost labor. Let's say we wanted to implement a quick finishing system. So for finishing, for example, I want to spray my finished part and also my doors. So what I will do, I'll create a new line and I'll call, let's call it timer. Another one will be quote. And then what I will do, if it's for parts, I will just create a group. So it's finishing parts. And the method for my finishing, I'll use the method called per square foot of finished area. And this is the square footage of finished area for your parts in your drawing. So I have two things to do. I have to do some primer and I have to do some coats. So I'll just add both per square foot of finished area. Maybe one would be 0.75 and one would be 1.25. So this is for the part. Now, let's say I will do also finishing for doors. So something good. And for doors, I will just add another group, finishing doors. And this time, instead of the square footage of finished area, I will use the per square footage. So per square foot of doors for both. Per square foot of doors. And if I do like face and back, I'll probably do a little bit more. So I'll put 1.5 and $2.5. by finishing both sides. Yeah. So this would capture the price per square foot for finished area for doors as well. Now, if I close and update, now we'll see that my cost will go up to now include hard finishing, door finishing. So of course, the numbers are not super accurate as right now, but it's just to show you how to build line by line your rate tables. So this will give me my cost, my labor, my finishing as well. And if you were to do some installation, so let's say install cabinets, and maybe I'll say install crown, or let's say molding. So cabinet, I will make one where I will go per assembly. And I'll just say that, for example, I charge even a set amount of time, set cost, sorry, per assembly. So I'll go, for example, 75. And molding, I'll go 25. And for molding, I'll go per linear foot of, so you can do linear foot of molding. So that will really go to include all type of molding. Or if you charge different costs for crown versus baseboard versus light rail, you can go create separate line for different type of molding. So me, I'll just go with one standard for all my molding. That will be the same. It's always $25, no matter what type of molding it is. But if you want to be more accurate, you could set one just for crown, for example. So this is installation for cabinet, installation for molding. So I'll just add also a group for installation. And now close and update. And now we have also the installation as well. And same for the cabinet, you could make it different value for different family or class of cabinets. So uppers, lowers, tall, corners. So you could basically break it down in separate group as well. You could even also create one for fillers because you have a method per filler. You scroll down, you have per filler as well. So there's a lot of things that you could go, like just get familiar with the different methods in the list and see which one will apply to your rate tables here. So now we have all those built into our test one rate table. So as you saw, if I just now use my project test, I can see that this is now $11,240. So now if I were just as a test, copy and put a bunch of cabinets and go back, of course, because I'm going with a cost plus system, I'm never worried about doing custom, doing more or less cabinet. I'm really going through trades in the business. I'm really going to use the material cost plus the markup. So even if I shrink my cabinet a little bit, the cost will change. So of course it's harder to basically configure, but the benefit of it is then when you do custom, you're sure that your custom will basically be properly priced using this method here. Sometimes some company will use like catalog pricing where they will set a cost per B12, B15, B16. It works if you always make the same cabinet and the size doesn't change or there's no customization. But if you do custom this will allow you to not worry about like adding a shelf, removing a shelf. You know that that will be priced in, and that will also make sure that the customization doesn't need to get approved all the time for pricing. So now my price is up to $12,175 in this example here by adding a couple of cabinets. So this is with the rate tables. Now, after the rate table, so we set the rate table, we set the labor, we set some finishing, some installation. It often happens that you need to also add accessories and also other extras. So I'll show you a couple of ways to add those different components to your project. Let's start with accessories. So accessories, that's where we can use what we call non-graphic accessories. And actually, we already have one as an example in this project, which is a magic corner. So we added this magic corner. So if we look at this project, we have a corner cabinet, and the client asked to include a magic corner in this cabinet. So the non-graphic accessory is just an accessory used for the bid center and the report center, which means that you will see it on the quote, you will see it also on the report if you print, for example, an accessory list. It's not going to display a magic corner per se. As you can see, there's no like magic corner included. It's really for pricing, for estimating, and for purchasing. So how you create those accessories? So in the catalog, so if I go back to my object and select the catalog, for example, called custom cabinet, I already have a folder called accessories. And that's where basically I add a couple of non-graphic accessories. So the last two one are just non-graphic. If you see that with my mouse over, it will label it as non-graphic and non-graphic, which means that those don't have any graphic, they are not visible. But if I drag and drop them on any cabinet, they will basically be added as an accessory. So if I wanted to add a garbage pullout for my estimating, so I can drag and drop it on the cabinet at the very end. So when you drop it, nothing really happened on the design. But if I go to the report, I will see that now this is cabinet number 6 as a garbage pullout. So if I print a report, an accessory report, or a cabinet list, I can actually tell my shop, hey, be careful to also include the garbage pullout as well. And if I need to now create a quote for a client, if I go to my bid center, this garbage pullout, because it's added to my order, will also have its own cost. Just a second for it to update. And if I go now to my accessory list, I see now I have a garbage pullout as well. Plus, still have my magic corner. So if you want to create and manage your own non-graphic accessory, all you have to do is when you're in your catalog is to right-click anywhere outside an actual assembly. So you just right-click to open the wheel, and you have an option on the right. It's called Add Accessory, and it's just to create a new entry in your catalog to add a new accessory. So I select Add Accessory, and now I can name it. So I will call it, for example, route. Let's pull out. We can set a price. You can upcharge it if you want. You can also add some labor. So labor is useful if you wanted to also in your estimate add extra time to install the accessory in the cabinet too. So now when I click OK, my pullout is now a new entry, and I can drag and drop it. In this case, I want to add it to the cabinet number 21, where I want just to pull out. So if I go to my report, see my cabinet 21 as a pullout. And so you will always label it with the cabinet number that the accessory number. So if you have several accessories in the same cabinet, there will be 1, 2, 3, and so on here. You can also add accessory directly in the order entry mode. So order entry, when you're in the report view, you have an order entry button. And here you can just stay in this view and just quickly drag and drop your accessory wherever cabinet you want. If the accessory is not necessarily tied to a specific cabinet, and let's say, just as an example, I wanted to add a pullout on its own, you just drag it at the very end of the list, so it's not being attached to any cabinet. So now the number will switch back to 0. It's just a pullout, a loose pullout, part of the project. And while you are in the order entry mode, you can see the list price, and you can manually change it just for this project if you wanted to as well. So the loose one, typically here, adding a pullout is maybe not the best option because you want to make sure you link it to a specific cabinet. But the non-graphic could also be some added fees to a project. For example, if I add accessories, and I'll say cleaning fees, like say it's a flat rate of $350. Click OK, and then you add it at the end. And now it's not any specific thing, but it's just that, you know, for this project, there's also a cleaning fee just for this project, for this room. So now when you go to return, you'll know that in your code, you will have also the cleaning fee part of the list of added accessories. So I'll be right here. And of course, this will all be added to my total price as well. And if you go in the options, you can specify, but you can also change the grouping if you wanted to go more by room, by catalog, or by cabinet, for example, or door style as well, just to rearrange those price as well. So now I have my accessories, and I have also my rate table being used. Another way also to add extras to a quote is to use the add-on button. So in the bid center, you have an add-on, and the add-on is just to simply create a rate table kind of just for one specific project. So instead of creating hundreds of thousands of rate tables just for specific things that will only be used once, you can create just a quick one. For example, I will create one for granite top, and maybe I sent a request to get a quote for granite countertop, and I'll just use the method called a specific amount, and they told me that for this project, it will be, for example, $3,500 for granite, and maybe I add a little markup of 15%. Click close. And now in my code, now I have an extra line called addition, and I'll also include granite top. And this granite top is really for this project, and it is a specific amount just for this project. And if you want to reopen the properties, make a change, add or remove tables, rate tables, you can just simply click on the add-on button. So you can add any extra here, just a one-time add-on for a specific project. Sometimes I know some user create default add-on that they already preset and just change the value based on the project. So we can maybe say I have I always need like installation, granite, delivery, and it's always a flat rate or it varies, and the guy will actually tell me how much it costs. So I will just apply it and change the value to my project. If it's set as default, be careful because it will always be by default already added to any new project you create as well. So this is with the addition button by clicking on addition in add-on, on the toolbar right here. So this was an example of starting from scratch. So now what I will do, I'll just unselect this rate table, and I have another one that I created before the presentation, and it was called sample coded painted. So if I go use that one, just one that has more setup done. So you will use material cost. I'll use assembly time. Subassembly is more to build the box, the drawer and rollout. Installation of hardware, of cabinets, of doors hanging, toe kicks, ground molding, and then door cost, labor cost, and finishing as well. So now if I turn this sample button, so now I can see in my breakdown, so switch to internal mode, I can see now my material being $6,000, assemblies being $650, sub-assemblies 0, so I don't have any cost for drawbox and rollout. Installation is 2,300, and this will be doors, purchasing the door, the labor time, so design, CNC milling as well, and finishing for parts, finishing for doors. And in my finishing, I have primer, top coat, clear coat, same for parts as well. And if I just click plus, I can see the actual detail of my finishing. So when you do this, right now I put everything in the same rate table. It might work in a lot of different scenarios, but sometimes it's easier to at least separate finishing or keep them in separate rate table, because you might have different level of finishing, like a finishing that's more or less complex. So you can actually check with the client, okay, what type of finishing are we looking at? And maybe there's more work involved, so it will cost more. So you can just separate the finishing on its own. And in this case, you will have just a rate table called, for example, finishing only, and that will only calculate finishing. And then you create another one that will be, for example, labor is just on its own, and now that will only calculate labor. So you can create different rate table and just check what you want to apply. And if you want, when you select your rate table, you can set some rate table as default. So if you want to just start quickly bidding, you can save every code I want to start to always include assembly, material cost, labor, and finishing. And then manually the user will uncheck or check what other option needs to be applied to the code as well. So that would be a good way to do it. So we cover the labor, as I said, we cover also the non-graphic accessories. So now we are perfectly on time, and we'll go back to the chat and go to see if there's any questions on the bidding multiplier.
Perfect. Thank you, Christopher. We have some good questions here. So the first one is there a solution or recommendation for jobs that have a mix of melamine, PVC, and also actual finished wood products?
Okay, so in this case, what we will do is to probably focus on creating also markup based on the material schedules. So if I close this project and now we'll save it, we can also add markup based on the material schedule, because if we use, let's say, melamine, plywood, MDF, and those all will likely come from different rate table. So we can still keep the material cost as it is. It's still set by material cost, but then we can plan that if we know we use, for example, PVC, or if we use MDF, there's more or less work involved. So when you select a specific rate table, you can actually upcharge the cost coming from this rate table. So the upcharge is based on the material cost. So you can say if it's MDF, there's always finishing to it. So add an extra percentage to the cost as well. So this will really now look at each cabinet in the project and look at basically what material schedule is set for the cabinet, and manually upcharge it. It's a more accurate version of creating a single rate table for the entire project, where we want to instead go by basically material selected by assemblies. And the same thing also, just to be complete, could be applied for doors and drawbars. So for each door schedule, you can also upcharge as well the entire schedule. So if you have, like, for example, a painted material for slab doors or another painted for shaker door or wood doors, you can have one being upcharged versus the normal one as well.
Thank you. I want to just encourage everyone, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat or into the Q&A. I'm monitoring them both. So I'll move on to the next question. Someone was wondering, where does the finished area come from in the rate table?
Okay, good question. So the finished area comes from the type of part that you using in your assemblies. So if you use a finished end, for example, a left hand finished or right finished end, that will calculate the outside of this finished end as a finished area. So if I open my project again, we'll see that in this project, I have a couple of finished end. For example, this left or right hand might be finished. So let's go in elevation and double click on the assembly. And if I look at my report, CamVision will flag the right hand to be finished, whereas the left hand is unfinished. So in this case, the finished area for this particular cabinet will be on this right hand, and it will represent basically the square footage of the outside of this surface here. And that will be added to the total of finished area. If you have another finished end, so that will just add to the other side. So if you have also a left finish and a right finish, you have 2 times this calculated. If you have a finished back, same thing. So if you are in the cabinet properties and change the back to be finished, that will also flag this to be added to the total square foot of finished area. And the last thing is, if you have an open cabinet, so let's say if I have one, no, just create one. So if you have an open cabinet and the interior is finished, so let's say I delete this and I go in my cabinet properties. In the case, I can check to have an exposed interior. So CamVision will now calculate the total finished area for all those 1, 2, 3, 4 sides inside the box. So this basically be added as well. And if I'm not mistaken, including the back as well. So just be mindful that when you check an assembly to be exposed, this will count it as the entire assembly. So it doesn't mean that if just you have like just 2 shelves and a back inside a cabinet, that will really count it as the entire assembly to be finished inside.
Are you ready for another question, Christopher?
Yep, I am.
Excellent. So this is a good one. Is there an easy way to do a price increase? For example, let's say Bloom has a general increase of 3.5%. I have several different items in the Bloom list, so would like to change pricing easily in place of adjusting each individual item.
So very good question. Easy way at the moment, no. This will require some work to be done prior to doing it. So in CamVision, when we manage material cost, it's all coming in CamVision from the material manager. So in the material manager, the only way I can change the cost of something is by going directly on the material itself and changing the cost directly here. So at the moment, we don't have like a direct way to do it in this view by adding a certain percentage for specific material. So your best way to tackle this is to basically go through the back door in the database and create a SQL query just to target specific material. So it's a little bit more complex, but if you have someone that's able to write SQL query, because the Cablevision database is open for third-party software and also for yourself to run query. So basically, you'll create an SQL query that will say, the example of query would be like for every material where the name is starting with Bloom, or maybe the vendor is Bloom, change the cost to add plus 3% to it. So this will require some custom programming, but when it's in place, that's something that you can run. And when it's basically properly written, it will take probably a few seconds to run this to an entire system, even if you have hundreds or thousands of different Bloom products, and apply the entire price increase to all of them. If you have an ERP system, some ERP system will also offer this service as well, because they will communicate with our database. So they could also put a system in place where they could change the price of item through a query as well. And actually, I believe if I take a look at the chat, someone mentioned that on the forum, and they support there's actual tool, a utility that's been done describing exactly what I said at the beginning. So you could download it and run it to manage your price. Just carefully read the documentation on it. Make sure that it does what you want it to do, because you're working live on your database. So just maybe run a test and then use this utility to do the price increase easily. Thank you, Darren.
Thank you. That's great. I have another question here. Okay, so this person is asking, I use SketchUp models for some of my pullouts. How did those get created so that I have the model and the pricing in the bid center and showing under accessories?
Okay, so in this case, if you want also to have the model and the price to it, you'll have to treat it as a material. And that's exactly where I am now. So you basically create a new material. The new material itself could be labeled as a miscellaneous material. So you could create a new one. You select, for example, the type miscellaneous. So the miscellaneous here, give it a name. Just call it SketchUp test. So you click finish, and in the material properties, so if you double click on the properties of the material, you see by default the model option is turned off, but you can, if you want, turn on the model. So you can tell Cablevision, I want to import my own model. So you go in the miscellaneous group, turn on model, and now what that will allow you to do is to actually import now a 3D model of your hardware. So we'll not go in depth on how to probably set it up in the model editor, but just to say I want to add one accessory, and let's see, what do I have here? Maybe I'll add, not sure what it is, but just first one I can find. It's actually a bracket for draw guide, for example. So I click OK. So as you can see now, this has a 3D model. And if I return and save, so the model now it's saved with the material, and I can still now go and work on my cost as well. So I can set a cost of vendor and do all the things that I mentioned earlier. Now, after that in the project, what you will have to do is to manually add a new part and basically assign this part to use this SketchUp material. Then you will display the material and also bring also the cost of it as well. So if I put it $15, so now it's called SketchUp test, and I'll just try. Maybe I'm missing a step, but I really do it really like rough demonstration without properly setting up. I'll just get here. I'm in my cabinet. I say I want to insert a new part. Usually the part itself, I will probably create a specific part family, like a specific part type called, for example, pull out or garbage can, something that I can easily identify. So me, I'll just use anything I can find. And if I change the material, So miscellaneous, I think I call it SketchUp test. So as you can see, I cannot really modify the size of it. And if I finish now, this is now visually represented in my cabinet. And if I were to also check, so this is now listed on my report. And if I were to try to go in my bid center, not my report center, my bid center, sorry. So I will apply a rate table, one where I know I'm getting material cost, go to internal mode. And if I go in material, I should see somewhere I have my SketchUp object. Now it's also part of my quote with a quantity one because I only have one here. So create the miscellaneous object, set the cost. I will add one step if you really want to be 100% accurate and make things properly, is in the part manager, you will probably want to add a new part type. I'll call it, just as an example, LZ is my internal name for Lazy Susan, if it's a Lazy Susan, for example. And why I'm doing this is because once you create your material, that will be basically a 3D model of the Lazy Susan with the price of the Lazy Susan. In your material schedule, in your job, you could already pre-assign the material to it in this setup here. So every time you create a new part called Lazy Susan, it will already come with the 3D model and be properly labeled. So that's why I said also you could also add the step to also create a part to it as well. But just to show you that this is entirely possible, just extra work, not impossible, not difficult, just to be properly implemented. And then you can graphically show the accessory and also get the cost of it added as well.
Thank you so much, Christopher. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.